Hey Wingman, and about 2 weekends ago, I was at Fort Johnson doing those tank videos. And the thing is that I keep doing this. I remember something in the news about, military bases being named after the Confederacy and stuff like that, and it needed to change. But it was real difficult for me to say Fort Johnson, because it's Fort Polk. It's always been Fort Polk. My whole life, it's been Fort Polk. It's in the same vein as Pluto being a planet. But I educated myself and realized why Pluto is not a planet. And it makes sense scientifically. So I guess this is the same thing. I have to educate myself as to why Fort Polk changed its name to Fort Johnson. Come along with me. Fort Polk was named after this guy, Lieutenant General Leonidas Polk, and he had a very interesting life. You see, for college, he went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but was only there for a little while before he decides to go to West Point. And after West Point, he gets his commission as a second lieutenant. He resigns his commission and goes to Virginia Theological Seminary and becomes a deacon. After a while, he moves to Maury County, Tennessee, where he becomes the largest slave owner in the county, owning at least 111 slaves. The Civil War breaks out, and he still wants to be part of the church, but he writes to his friend and former classmate from West Point, the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, and offers his services to the Confederacy. President Davis makes him a 2-star, and he leads in the Army of Mississippi, then leads in the Army of Tennessee, then gets transferred to the Department of Mississippi and East Louisiana. General Polk is finally killed in Marietta, Georgia by artillery rounds fired by General Sherman. Although he wasn't a real good general, he was loved by his troops and loved by the church, and his remains are in New Orleans, Louisiana. In 1941, the U.S. Army starts building a military campsite in Vernon Parish, Louisiana. And normally back then, the War Department, we now say Department of Defense, says that you must name it after a local hero. Who's the local hero? Well, since Louisiana really loves the church, so much so that it is the only state in the nation that has parishes instead of counties, the person they select is General Leonidas Polk. And so they name it Camp Polk. And with military terminology, camps are temporary bases. Forts are permanent bases. So during and after World War II, a lot of camps turn into forts. Now we got that out of the way, how do we get to Fort Johnson? Well, do you remember the whole controversy of people getting rid of Confederate statues? Well, back in 2023, Congress mandates that all military installations named after Confederate troops must be renamed. The first base to be renamed, Fort Benning, Georgia. And in the same year, Fort Polk becomes Fort Johnson. Who's Johnson? William Henry Johnson fought in World War I with the 369th Infantry Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters. And if you're a history buff like me, or you picked up the graphic novel, The Harlem Hellfighters, or you've played the game, Battlefield 1, you probably know about the Harlem Hellfighters. Black troops were segregated in World War I, and they were given menial tasks and were not given the proper medical treatment. Also understand, this is the early 1900s, so racism is palpable in the United States. But a lot of African Americans signed up for the Army, thinking that their status now as a veteran would change racial stereotypes in the country. So France tells America, we need more soldiers, because remember, this is season 1 of Germany versus everybody. So the 15th Infantry in New York gets redesignated as the 369th Infantry and gets sent to France. And with these guys knowing what they're fighting for and fought very fierce and were from New York, they got the nickname Harlem Hellfighters. Enter Sergeant Johnson. France now has the Harlem Hellfighters, and so they moved them out to the Argonne Forest to protect that area. Well, Sergeant Johnson, along with one other troop, are standing watch at night, and they come under attack by a German raid. The first troop wounded immediately, so Sergeant Johnson uses the butt of his rifle, grenades, his bare fists, his bolo knife in order to kill 4 Germans, wounds plenty more, and the whole raid retreats. He suffers 21 wounds, but because of his bravery and his actions in combat, he gets the nickname Black Death. The French hear about his actions and they award him the Croix de Guerre, which is the equivalent of the American Silver Star. The Harlem Hellfighters come back victorious. Actually, that's him in the car. And they're like, look at what the colored troop can do for the United States. Yep, the colored troop. And so one of the jobs that they ask him to do is to tour around talking about the racial harmony that in World War I and being in the trenches and stuff like that, and how the white troop and the colored troop can be along and together. But instead, he talks about the racial discriminations that happened while he was fighting in France. They arrest him. The charge? He's wearing his uniform while he is no longer on duty. He has received no medals. He doesn't even receive the Purple Heart, and he continues to fight to get the medical help that he needs. 8 years later, the VA finally makes him permanent and total and starts giving him compensation because of tuberculosis. 2 years later, he dies from a heart attack from wounds he sustained while he was in France. He's pretty much all but forgotten from 1929 until 1991, when Albany, New York has the Washington Park and they erect this statue of him. In 1996, Sergeant Johnson finally, posthumously, gets awarded the Purple Heart by President Bill Clinton. You know, Hillary Clinton's husband. He was president. And in 2015, President Barack Obama posthumously awards Sergeant Johnson the Medal of Honor, 86 years after his death. So why is an army fort in Vernon Parish, Louisiana, named after a Harlem Hellfighter from North Carolina? Well, all throughout Fort Johnson, you're going to see this. It's a hammer striking an anvil with the words, "Forging the Warrior Spirit." And Sergeant Johnson definitely embodies the warrior spirit. And if you're ever at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, you can go find his marker with the Purple Heart and Medal of Honor emblazoned on it. I know this was a long video, but now I understand and now pretty proud to call Fort Polk Fort Johnson. I should probably do the other forts while I'm doing this. Have peace and love.